Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Friday, January the 15th, 2021, and I want to be updating you on COVID 19. So, in Canada, we have 69,004,412 cases confirmed in Canada today. Alberta has 11,585 cases, 1,389 deaths. British Columbia has 59,608 cases, 1,338 deaths. Manitoba has 27,125 cases, 760 deaths. New Brunswick has 884 cases, 12 deaths. Newfoundland and Labrador has 395 cases, 4 deaths. Nova Scotia has 1,550 cases, 65 deaths. Ontario has 223,001,308 cases, 5,289 deaths. Prince Edward Island has 104 cases, 0 deaths. Quebec has 23,008,745 cases, 8,938 deaths. Saskatchewan has 19,715 cases, 210 deaths. Northwest Territories has 24 cases, 0 deaths. Nunavut has 266 cases, 1 death, and Yukon has 70 cases and 1 death total. So these are the cases that we have in Canada. So our top story is with the vaccine. Canadian is on rapid growth trajectory. 2,000 more people could die from COVID-19 in the next 10 days. New modeling released by Public Health Agency of Canada suggests the numbers of daily COVID-19 cases could be more than triple to 30,000 if people increase their contacts during their time of widespread community transmission. The report also projects that if Canadians simply maintain their current levels of contact with people outside their household, case counts will still rise to roughly 13,000 a day from 7,900 now. The modeler said that based on current cases counts, Canada remains on rapid growth trajectory with roughly 2,000 more people expected to die over the next 10 days. As the country approaches to death total 20,000, as many as 100,000 more people could contract the virus over the next week and a half. Quick, strong, and sustained measures are needed to interrupt rapid growth and maintain COVID-19 control, said its report. Reducing COVID-19 activity is urgently needs as rollouts of safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine begins. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam told a news conference that the vaccine rollout, which is now protecting priority groups of high-risk Canadians, will not have a big impact on the numbers in the short term. In terms of the national projection and transmission in communities, you're not going to see that in the initial months, which is why I think our message is to absolutely get on with the public health measures, she said. Do all of those things, don't not essential travel are all really count. It works, and when you can suppress the projection, the vaccine have a longer runway. Deputy Chief Public Officer of Health Dr. Howard said government and external experts are working to determine the impact of vaccine rollouts on numbers of mid and long term. But in a present time, it's really difficult to say. There are so many factors involved. Even today, we're seeing issues in terms of vaccine supply. How many vaccines are being rolled out across the country, he said. There are other factors in terms of increasing rates of infection in various parts of the country. So there are many different factors to play. Right now, Alberta, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Quebec are the provinces reporting the highest infection rates per 100,000 people. Tam said many provinces, including some that had been on downward, saw a sharp rise in daily case numbers after the holidays. That's likely due to people having more contact over the holidays and reduced testing during those weeks, she said. Since the holidays, stronger community levels public health measures have been adopted across Canada, and some areas are showing that the public health measures are working to slow growth. However, we have yet to see the widespread and sustained declines in daily cases counts that could indicate we are bringing the pandemic under control nationally, she said. Some 10 months into this pandemic, long-term care homes continue to report hundreds of daily cases. There are now more than 400 outbreaks nationwide, a situation which is expected to push hospitalization rates higher. Still, Alberta and Manitoba are reporting the highest rates of hospitalization per 100,000 people. During a news conference outside his residence in Rudo Cottage, today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the outbreak now occurring in long-term care homes in Ontario and across the country are tragic. Our parents and grandparents built this country. They raised us and they deserve so much better, he said. In a virtual that we continue to give vaccine to vulnerable people as quickly as we can, and that's exactly what we're focused on. But remember, no one is invisible. Even if we're young and healthy, this virus can be very dangerous, and that's why we will have to keep doing our part. Trudeau said the white vaccine are rolling out across the country. Canadians must reduce their in-person contact. For the moment, that's the only way to get these numbers down, he says. Since yesterday, Ontario is now under a stay-at-home order. That is a kind of tough but necessary decision that provincial governments are having to make. Calling on new modeling alarming, NDP health critic Don Davis called for stronger federal measures to reduce the spread of the virus. The number released today paint a very picture, he said. COVID-19 is claiming the lives of 145 Canadians every single day, and situations getting worse. Clearly, we've been doing isn't working. Forecasts show that the stronger response is necessary to slow the alarming spread of COVID-19. So that's pretty much what happened, and that's Dr. Teresa Tam that was talking um, today for the COVID-19 vaccine and all that stuff. Now we're going to be moving on talking about um, another thing I want to talk about. Yeah. Trudeau says bloc leader is using coded language in attack on Transport Minister Omar Al-Jabra. Blanchette said he was only raising questions about Al-Jabra's ties to political Islamic movement. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today accused Bloc Quebec leader Yves Francois Blanchet of pandemic to the worst element in Canadian society by using coded language to make intolerant statement about newly appointed Transport Minister Omar Al-Jabra. I was absolutely floored to see a federal party leader using that and carefully coded questions, particularly last week when we just lived through last week what happened when leaders don't take care of the words they use and play these dangerous games around intolerance and hate, Trudeau said. Algerba, who received his first ministerial post in cabinet shuffle Tuesday, was signaled out in the bloc press release that to sow doubt about his accusation with that it called the political Islamic movement. Blanchette said Wednesday that the question arises due to the minister's former role as head of the Canadian Arab Federation. Blanchette also said he refuses to accuse the minister of anything specific. Blanchette cited a 2016 article by right-wing Quebec newspaper columnist that made suggestions about Algerba's personal and professional history. It's really question about his post and also the separation of church and the Senate, which is the profit value for the bloc, said bloc spokesperson Julian Colvin. We don't want a race of any accusation because I don't think there is that much. In 2009, then the Citizens and Immigration Minister Jason Kenney opted to cut funding to the Canadian Arab Federation, whose leader at the time made statements that Kenney called anti-Semitic and supportive of terrorism groups. Earlier today, Blanchette accused a statement saying he was only raising legitimate questions about the past positions Al-Bajabra had held at the Canadian Arab Federation and accused the Liberal Party of refusing to allow Al-Jabra to answer questions raised against him. Trudeau appeared visibly upset with the suggestion that Blanchet could accuse his remarks as an effort to simply ask questions about algebras, approximately the political Islamic movement. That's ridiculous, Trudeau said. That's the kind of political pandering to the worst element and to fears and anxiety has no place in Canada, and all of us need to stand up strongly and push back against anywhere it happens in the country. So Prime Minister was upset because the Quebec leader used bad language, and that wasn't right for that to happen. Now we're gonna be moving on, talking about um, PM says Ottawa is looking at banning certain flights. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said today the federal government is strengthening pandemic restrictions on international travel as concerns mount about Canadian traveling abroad, but suggested the government's pre-existing measures are still effective. Our measures have been very strong, but we've always open to strengthening them as necessary. He said when asked if the government would consider a ban on international travel, we're always looking at various measures as they are effective elsewhere in around the world. Trudeau insisted that Canada mandatory 14-day quarantine for those crossing into Canada has been extraordinarily effective. Earlier this month, Intergovernment Affairs Minister Dominic Liban pushed back against claim in the Government of Canada can legislate to limit travel outside the country. If we look around the world, it continues that that have requirements for exist various. I'm not sure we want to be on the list of those countries, but any measures that tells Canadians that non-essential travel internationally should not be undertaken is something that we're prepared to look at, he said. The Prime Minister did say Friday the government is looking to ban certain flights as new variants of COVID-19 emerge around the world, such as new Brazilian variant of the coronavirus. Canada temporarily banned flights from the United Kingdom last month as new coronavirus variants spread there. We're doing whatever it takes to protect Canadians, including looking at banning certain flights. If necessary, decisions must be made based on public health guidelines, he told a brief outside at home at Rudo Cottage. As always, our ministers are effectively leaning in on and talking to experts to reach a determination without delay. We will continue to keep Canadians informed of any new decision we take. Trudeau took multiple rounds of questions today about air travel in response to recent controversy involving Canadians traveling aboard in defiance of federal government's advisory against non-essential international travel. A recent story showed that Canadian air carriers have operated more than 1,500 flights between Canada and 18 popular vacation destinations since October 1st, even as caseloads increase and health crisis depends. Provincial politicians, federal MP, and senators, and some executives have become enrolled to controversy over travel. The Canadian government has had an advisory in place urging Canadians non-essential international travel since March 14, 2020. Canadian citizenship are permitted, residents are advised to avoid all non-essential travel outside of Canada until further notice to limit the spread of COVID-19. So these are what's happening in Canada and around the world. Now I'm going to be moving on talking about other stuff. I'm going to be moving on talking about Edmonton. So Edmonton, Scott McCain won't seek third term as downtown city councillor. Scott McCain will not run in fall municipal elections, CBC News has learned. McCain in the second term and eighth year of representing Ward 6 is the city's downtown. There's a couple things that I'll be very proud of, but I didn't do them. We did them, McCain said in an interview Friday. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed a lot. I've met amazing people, but I just feel like it's time to hand the brace ring over to someone else. McCain was first elected in 2013 when Don Iverson was also first elected as mayor. McCain has been a strong champion of helping homeless people, with Edmonton now planning 900 new spots for permanent supportive housing. He also helped from the city anti-racism advocacy committee. Downtown has evolved dramatically over the two terms McCain had been in office. The city had president over the development of Ice District and Rogers Place. The city has also made streetscape improvement to Jasper Avenue, Churchill Square, and Stain Murray Library. McCain admitted to some decisions were tough. Every time you make a decision as a city councillor, you make some people happy, but you make a lot of others really unhappy, he said. I think that wore me after that time. One tough decision was agreeing to a supervised injection site in Chinatown, which was met with strong opposition from the community. Not really to retire, McCain was a reporter and columnist with Edmonton Journal for 24 years, but he said he's not ready to retire. Going forward, he said he'd like to be an advocate for mental health and addiction, or work in communication or journalism again. McCain is a third sitting councillor to announce he's not running for re-election. Michelle Walters in Ward 10 and Ben Henderson in Ward 8 will also not seek a re-election. Mayor Don Iveson is not seeking the mayor chair in 2021. Nomination for Asping City Councilor, Mayor, and school trustees open January 4th and run until September 1st. The municipal election is set for October the 18th. So these are this what's happening. Now I'm gonna be moving on talking about other stuff. So everything you need to know about COVID-19 in Alberta, Friday, January the 15th, 2021. So the latest, Alberta will ease some public health restrictions starting on Monday, allowing hair salons, barber shops, and other personal services businesses to reopen by appointments only. Dr. Dina Hinshaw, Alberta Chief Medical Officer of Health, said Thursday that the province made the decision for limited reopening for examining everything that was closed after Premier Jason Kenney UCP government imposed tighter restrictions in mid-December in the bid to curb the COVID-19 active cases, hospitalization, and ICU counts. As of Monday, up to 10 people will be also allowed to gather outdoors, and up to 20 people will be allowed to attend funeral. Indoor gatherings remain prohibited, and funeral receptions are still not allowed. On Thursday, Alberta identified another 967 new cases of COVID-19, up from 875 new cases the day before, since reaching a peak on December 1st, December 7th of 1,767 new cases per day. The 7-day average of daily new cases has been steady decline in Alberta. As of January 13th, the 7-day average was 875, which is roughly the level it was in the mid-November when the numbers were exploding. The province had 12,434 active cases as of Thursday, down from 12,838 on Wednesday. The total of active cases in Alberta has been dropping slowly but steadily since it peaked at 21,138 on December 13, a day after tougher provincial restrictions kicked in the made working from home mandatory for those who could, banned in-person service at restaurants, pubs, and bars, and entirely closed entertainment and recreation faculties, from movie theaters to gyms, personal and wellness service like spas and hair salons. A few days earlier, the province had also instituted a mandatory province-wide mask requirement and banned all outdoor and indoor social gathering with people beyond one immediate household. There were 806 people in hospital Thursday, including 136 in intensive care. Another 21 people have died from total of 1,389 deaths. That comes 2 days after the province hit grim new record with 38 new deaths reported in a single day on Tuesday. 12 schools above 0.4% are on alert or have outbreaks. With 15 cases in total, outbreaks have been declared in two of them, accounting for 5 cases in school. Transmission have likely occurred in 3 schools, and all 3 will only led to 1 new cases. The continuing decline in numbers means fears of post-holiday COVID-19 surge appear not to have materialized in Alberta, and experts say current trends are encouraging, but the province still has some ways to go before major public health measures can be safely lifted before the holidays. Kenny said he was concerned that Albertans might misunderstand or disregard the stricter rules imposed in December restricting family gathering, but it appears Albertans generally followed the rules and limited the spread of the virus. A post-holiday spike in cases would be expected to have shown up to data by now, but so far there has been no major increase. Alberta's case numbers and hospitalization remain high, and they pose a threat to our healthcare system capacity continue to, Shandro said. Today we can't entirely ease up this goal, but we can make small adjustments to provide Albertans with some limited ac- activities. So that's what's happening in Alberta. Now I'm going to be moving on to Ontario. Ford ousted MP from caucus over open letter pushing for end to COVID-19 lockdown. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has kicked York Centre MP Raman Barber out of the Progressive Conservative caucus for sending an open letter that calls for the province lockdown and COVID-19 restriction to end. In a statement issued Friday morning, Ford called the comments from the two-page letter irresponsible, saying Barber will not be allowed to seek re-election as a PC member. By spreading misinformation, he is undermining the tireless effort of our frontline healthcare workers at the critical time, and he is putting people at risk. Ford said. I will not jeopardize single Ontarians' life by ignoring public health advices. There is no room for political ideology in our fight against COVID-19. Rather, our response has been and we will always be driven by evidence and data, Ford said. Fortunate, Mr. Barb has put himself ahead of his PC caucus team, who have worked around the clock for months to support and protect the people of Ontario through this public health crisis. In a Barber's letter posted on Twitter today, the MPP argues that while the virus is real, the fear of COVID-19 is tragic. Lockdowns are deadly than COVID. I wrote a respect letter to Premier Ford asking to end the lockdown, he said in a tweet. Barber wrote that the virus is not deadly as first thought and claimed Ontario's hospital capacity is better than pre-pandemic so far. More than 5,200 Ontarians have lost their lives to the virus. In response, the Minister of Health critical a fact sheet disputing or outright many of the central claims in Barter's letter. You can read the full text of ministry response at the bottom of this story. Moreover, the Canadian Mental Health Association issued its own statement saying that Barber's mischaracterized its research on connection between the pandemic and suicidal among adults in the country. At a time when so many Ontarians are struggling, we are disappointed that the MPP has, for political purpose, misconducted about the sensitive subject of suicidal, said Kamli Quinley, CEO of the organization. Barber's claims come as provincial officials and health experts alike have warned that Ontario healthcare system is on brink of being overwhelmed. The province began warning hospitals to prepare for transferable for patients across out of region just over a week ago is now telling ICU doctors across Ontario to prepare to use critical care triage to determine who will receive life-saving care when ICU resources are limited. The public need to understand they're at risk of not getting the care they need. Dr. Michael Warner, medical director of critical care at Michelle Garner Hospital, told Thursday. Warner said implementing these critical would mean that not every patient who needs critical care relates to COVID-19 or not. We'd get the critical care of tragic comes into effect. It makes me very uncomfortable and moral distressing, and it's terrible for patients, he said. In series of tweet posted later this morning, Barber said he doesn't regret speaking out for millions of lives and livelihoods by public health and that he couldn't watch the suffering anymore. He called Ford move to turf him from caucus as a regretful decision since many colleagues agree with me. Meanwhile, Ontario reporting another another 2,998 new cases of COVID-19 this morning, as well as 100 additional deaths of people with the illness. In the further deaths are the most record on a single day since the pandemic began, though the Minister of Health said the 46 occurred earlier in the pandemic and were included today due to the data cleaning initially by the Middlesex London Health Unit, but offered no further detail. The previous single-day high came on January 7, 2021, when 89 deaths were reported. Ontario official death total is now 5,809. Today's new cases included 800 in Toronto, 618 in Peel Region, and 215 in York Region. Other public health units saw a double or triple digits increase. Waterloo Region 161, Niagara Region 153, Windsor-Essex 148, Hamilton 138, Ottawa 133, Durham Region 113, Halton Region 81, Scum 73, 73 cases, Middlesex London 61, Wellington, Dufferin Gulf 51, Eastern Ontario's 27 cases, Brampton is 25, Huron is 20, Southwestern Ontario is 19 cases, and Alberta is 13 cases. Note all the figures used in the story are found on the Minister of Health COVID-19 dashboard or daily summary. The number of cases for any region may differ from what is reported by the local public health unit because local units report figure at different times. The new cases comes as Ontario network of labs processed a new record high 76,472 test samples for the novel coronavirus and reported a test positive rate of 4.6%, the lowest hit has been in nearly 3 weeks. The 7-day average of new daily cases dropped 3,273, while the numbers of active cases province-wide fell for fourth straight day of 28,825. The numbers of COVID-19 with COVID-19 in hospital decreased by 10 down to 1,647. Of those, 387 were being treated in intensive care, one fewer than yesterday, and 280 required to breathe. Another 15,803 doses of of the vaccine were administered yesterday. The province said a total of 17,004,630 shots have been given out so far in Ontario, and 17,904 people have been fully vaccinated with both doses. The federal government said Friday the global pharmaceutical giant Pfizer will temporarily reduce shipments of its vaccine to Canada because it's pausing some production lines at its faculty Belgium to expand long-term manufacturing capacity. Pfizer believes that by the end of March it will be able to catch up, such as we will be on track for the total committed dose. Q1 public service and Pro shipments, Minister Antti Anad said referred to the first quarter of the calendar year. In a statement, Ford said the province is evaluating the possible impact of the news. We will adjust as necessary, recognizing the fact that Ontario will soon have baselines capacity to vaccine nearly 40,000 people a day with the ability to triple or quadruple this capacity with notes, the statements said. I know the federal government is working to secure more supply when they are able to deliver more vaccine. Ontario will be ready to administrate them. So this is the Ontario. There's already a guy got fired because of his comments, and we all know what happened, and it's really scary when that kind of things happen, especially people when they don't follow the health rules and you don't follow the health guidelines. This is a big deal and it's a big problem, especially in Canada when you see this kind of stuff. Now we're gonna be moving to world if there's anything world. Yes, we're gonna be moving to world. Um, Biden announces new vaccine SARS massive spending to stem COVID-19 suffering in U.S. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden has picked a former Food and Drug Commissioner to lead vaccine science as part of his drive to put 100 million shots into the arm of Americans in his administration's first 100 days to stem the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. David Kessler, who will have the title of Chief Science Officer of COVID-19 Response, headed the Food and Drug Administration in 1990 under the president of both political parties. He has been acting as a top pandemic advisor to Biden, and his opponent was announced Friday by the President Transition Office. Kessler will work out of Federal Department of Health and Human Services, assuming responsibility for scientific side, Operation Warp Speed, an effort to launch under the Trump administration to rapidly develop vaccine and treatment. The driver has already helped produce twice highly effective vaccine and more on the way. He will replace Monto, a researcher and former drug company executive who led Operation for the Trump administration, will become the consult to the incoming team. Kessler will work with Jen Wenzel, who will continue as the Chief Operation Officer. Kessler will coordinate vaccine review and approval, as well as the logistic and manufacturing millions of more doses. Experts say the U.S. will need to vaccinate upwards of 250 million people to approach the goal of herd immunity, where there is widespread resistance to virus, allowing for a return to normal life. That comes of heels of the announcement on Thursday evening in which Biden has unveiled a 1.9 trillion US coronavirus plan to end a crisis of deep human suffering by spending up vaccines and pumping out financial help to those struggling with the pandemic. Called the American Rescue Plan, the legislative proposal would meet Biden's goal of administering 100 million vaccines by the 100th day of his administration, and advocacy his objection of reopening most schools by the spring on parallel track. It delivered another round of aid to stabilize the economy while the public health efforts seek the upper hand on the pandemic. We're not only an economic and environmental to act now, I believe we have moral obligation, Biden said in a national address Thursday. At the same time, he acknowledged that his plan does not come cheaply. Biden proposed um, 1,400 checks for most Americans, which on top of $600 provides in most recent COVID-19 bill, would bring in total to the $2,000 that Biden has called for it. It will also extend a temporary boost on employment benefits and moration and evacation and foreclosure through September. The political outlook for the legislation remained unclear. In joint statement, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and soon-to-be Senate Leader Chuck Schumer, both Democrats, praised Biden for the including liberal priorities, saying they would move quickly to pass it after Biden takes office next Wednesday. But Democrats will have a narrow margin in both chambers of Congress, and Republicans will likely push back on issues that range from increase and minimum wage to providing more money for status, while demanding inclusion of priorities such as liberation protection for business. Remember that bipartisan $900 million COVID-19 relief bill came law just 18 days ago to the Republican Senate. John Corner from Texas, but Biden said that was only a down payment, and he promised more major legislation next month focused on rebuilding the economy. Biden has long held the economy recovery in accessible linked with controlling the coronavirus that squares with judgment of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the most powerful business lobbying group and traditional and adversary of Democrats. We must defeat COVID-19. We can restore our economy, and that requires our vaccination effort, the chamber said in a statement Thursday night, which welcomed Biden's plan but stopped short endorsing it. So far, more than 38,005,000 people have died of the COVID-19 in the U.S., with daily deaths have topped 4,000. Government's numbers out Thursday reported a jump in weekly unemployment claims to 96,005,000, a sign that is rising infection are forcing businesses to cut back and lay off workers. Under Biden, multiple strategy about $400 billion would be go directly to combating COVID-19, while the rest is focused on economic relief and aid status and municipalities. About 20 million would be alerted for a more disciplined focus on vaccination. On top, some 8 million already approved by Congress. Biden has called for setting up massive vaccination centers and sending mobile units to hard-to-reach areas. A month after the first vaccine were given in the U.S., the nation's vaccination campaign is off to a slow start with only about 11 million people getting the first dose shots. More than 30 million doses have been delivered. Biden called the vaccine rollout a dismissible failure so far and said he would provide more details about his vaccination campaign on Friday. The plan also provided 15 million to expand testing, which is seeking a key reopening most schools by the end of the new administration first 100 days. After 13 million would be allocated to help schools reopen without risking further contagion. So that's what's happening in the U.S. So far, and that's what the Biden's plan is all about. There's a whole thing that what Biden's is all about, and that's what pretty much he's talking about. Might be an election coming up. Liberal leader Andrew Furry has been spotted visiting Government House, the resident of the Newfoundland and Labrador Lieutenant Governor, stroking expectation that a general election call immediate. The visit, uh, Judy Footy almost certainly to request she dissolve the House of Assembly, paving the way for an election, followed days of increased announcement by the provincial government, including new funding and program as well as agreements reached with various. CBC reported Terry Roberts had a brief exchange with the Liberal leader as he left Government House. Lovely date isn't well. Talk to you later, Furry said. What's the plan for this evening? Roberts asked. 6 p.m. Furry replied, confirming an election has been called. Furry was referring to a Liberal Party campaign kick-off event Friday evening at the Confederation Building. Furry was required by provincial law to call an election with 12 months of being sworn in as premier. However, the likelihood of Furry's decision to call an election now in the middle of both an unpredicted North Atlantic winter and a pandemic has already come under fire from both the opposition Tories and the NDP, who have both said the governing Liberals should wait for the Premier Economic Recovery Team chaired by Mo Green report first. A progressive report from the recovery team outlined recommendations for dealing with the public service and escalating debt is not expecting until the end of February, its final report says.
Ja, we couldn't pretend change your clothes and come help me this bed, okay?
So this is what the government party has to do, and that's what we have to deal with that. And the visor and the bow tech is very we can see it in different way and different variety, right? So what I will do is we will continue with the news and the course of the news, right? So Trudeau, he already opened the vaccination and he opened all that stuff, right? And we saw it in every way that it's very important that people follow the health rules and they follow the health guidelines as much as they can. Because again, we just have only that's the only thing that I can say. I can't say anything much than that, but uh, we need to do what's right at the end of the day and at least follow the health rules because the health rules is really important in every way. And hopefully people do that and do the right thing as much as they can. And that's what's really important. I'm going to be moving on now talking about essential stuff like for example, Alberta, we can see already how things are, and it's sad to see like how really Alberta is, right? How things are. Um, because it's very important that people really need to understand the news and they need to understand what's happening in the news in every way, right? I can't really say anything more than that, but the news is what makes it interesting, is what makes it really good, right? And that's what we need to know. We need to understand how much it is, how much we need to take to do that. Anyways, we're going to be moving on now, talking about um, trying to find news today because there's really not much news that we usually cover. We cover a lot than that, you know. Um, we will be. Oh yeah, the CBC. The CBC made it to the news yesterday. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Um, so yesterday. So this is the Canadian boxer. So CBC wrong fire report who told the news site that he was forced to delete tweets critical of Don Cherry. So CBC acted improperly by firing a reporter who leaked to a news site at the network forced him to take down a tweet criticizing broadcaster Don Cherry. Ahmed Khan, who worked in CBC Manitoba newsroom as temporary reporter and editor from a year before his termination in December 2019, is now entitled to restain for a minimum of 4 months or receive 4 months of compassion, Lorne wrote in the ruling. His chosen method of publicizing an internal CBC decision ordering him to take down a tweet was, in my view, like other public comments from CBC employees, not intended to harm the CBC or its reputation, nor there any evidence that it did so. CBC has said Khan was fired not because of the tweet, but of both leak of uh, variation and other uh, pornography remarks was found to have made online. Cherry was fired in November 2019 after he outburst on Hockey Night in Canada, in which the controversial commentator spoke about Remembrance Day and his outrage over people that come here, referring to immigrants and don't wear puppies. But Khan also told management that he believed CBC policies were being applied selectively and in the way that was harmful to journalists of color, according to his testimony, which ran for 7 days over several months last year. He testified he wasn't satisfied with the answers he got from management and decided to leak what had transpired to news sites Canada Land, which published the story on November 14th. Khan testified he was conflicted about telling Canada Land about felt indecision was necessary about the race and the CBC about how its journalist policies were in the view silencing employees of color. Later in November, another CBC report, Austin Gerpish using a shared company laptop that Khan had been used, discovered Khan's personal Twitter and WhatsApp account were still logged in and found messages that included an admission that Khan had contacted Canada Land. I noticed the WhatsApp screen that I was unfamiliar with and opened it. Grash said in a statement to CBC on Thursday, I was shocked and disappointed to see both a threat of misinformation about the CBC and several home messages. He was also cited for making a pornography slur WhatsApp where his profile identified him as a CBC employee, saying the ruling. The union representing Khan, the Canadian Media Gulf, filed the grievance of his behalf. The CBC violated the collective agreement, the Canada Labour Code, the Privacy Act, the Canadian Human Rights Act, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It argued Khan has a reasonable expectation that his message, even though they were on a company laptop, were private and that they should not have been used by management in the decision to fire him. The union also claimed that Khan was not seeking or and embrace someone, but was calling for public discussion about CBC journalism policies and how they were silencing employees of color. In this ruling, said Khan had a reasonable expectation of privacy for his message and that his right to privacy was violated, which detained the entire process that led to the determination of his employees. He said it was clear that Grabrish could not have found what he did without conducting a search and what any suggestion that all the messages were on the screen when Garish opened the laptop, given that some of them were months old. In the Institute and ethnography, where controversy inherits in the nation of the product. My view is Is it an unfounded leap of logic to suggest that Mr. Khan's action regarding to tweet somehow affected the CBC reputation? He wrote. Kim Charnacity, CBC, a branch president of the CMG, said the union is extremely pleased with the ruling, which is upheld the reasonable expectation of personal privacy for employees. I'm trying to settle this grievance and must be noted CMG has always focused on how management treated Khan and how it dealt with a situation of racialized temporary employees, she said in a statement. Management failed to respect Khan's reasonable expectation of privacy, which is clear violation under our collective agreement. So pretty much the CBC did not care to respect Khan's because Khan had his own way of thinking and his own way of to doing things, but the CBC did not care, did not see what they were doing as racist, and I didn't know that. That surprised me to read that about. So we're gonna be moving on talking about other stuff. There's really not much news today. Um, we can go to Quebec. So Quebec Attorney General seeks to challenge mosque shooter sentence in Supreme Court. Quebec Attorney General and Crown Prosecutor Office are taking the sentencing of a man who killed 6 men in the Quebec City Mosque in the Supreme Court of Canada. In 2019, Alexander was sentenced to life in prison for the 2017 attack with no chance of parole before 40. Last November, however, bonded parole period was reduced to 25 years of Quebec Court of Appeal, described the original sentence as cruel and unusual and inhumane ruled in favor of defense arguments. The Attorney General said the Crown Prosecutor Office announced plans to appeal the Court of Appeal ruling to the Supreme Court in joint statement released Friday. The request to have the case heard by Supreme Court opens the door to possible ruling on the sentencing the Stephen Harper government, conservative government, introduced in 2011. Since then, several convicted murderers have been given the consecutive life sentence, including Justice Justin Burrow, who is serving a life sentence with no chance of parole for 75 years for killing 3 RCMP officers in Moncton, New Brunswick in 2014. Conservative MP and House Leader Gerald Delt took in Twitter up to applaud the decision to take the case to Supreme Court. He pointed out the current Liberal government has not struck down the sentencing, previously allowing the consecutive life sentence. So the Conservatives they want to change that, although people the Quebec still investigating about what happened. Doctors conducting dry run to decide who gets access to critical care if hospitals exceed capacity. It's a scenario doctors never thought they would have to face and are still desperately trying to avoid. But there is now planning underway in Quebec and Ontario to prepare for the possibility hospitals may have to make choices between who gets access to critical care beds when the demand for space exceeds capacity. In a contrary for everything at any physician I imagine has ever been taught. Certainly that I was ever taught, says Doctor Peter Goldberg, head of the critical care at Montreal McGill University of Health Center. Our teaching has always been that our contract is with the patient in front of us, regardless of what his or her cost will be to the system. Quebec is hoping to avoid having to use a tragic protocol that would help doctors determine which patients receive care. Such as protocol would be enacted only to demand for ICU beds across the province 200% beyond normal capacity. Like many institutions, Goldberg said the MUHC has already scaled back surgeries and other healthcare services in attempt to avoid being stretched too far. Staff at Montreal Royal Victoria Hospital and Montreal staff at Montreal Royal Victoria Hospital and Montreal General Hospital will soon begin what Goldberg called dry runs, in which a group of three staff will decide if a patient is best suited to receive critical care or if the beds should be left for someone with a better chance to survive. I'm told that happens. I'm told this happens on battlefields all the time, but I never saw our medical system as battlefield, he said, and I guess that's what some of us need to change our perspective on. Quebec development its own framework after the pandemic struck last March in consultation with a working group of more than 40 experts, including intensive care specialists, emergency physicians, nurses, lawyers, ethics, and patients. The protocol entitled for access to intensive care adults to contact for us extreme pandemic total 63 pages lay out the critical that must be considered. Broadly speaking, doctors are advised to prioritize patients more likely to survive an intensive care hospitalization. Each patient is assessed based on the medical issues that would likely prevent them from being successfully weaned and ventilated. The protocol was revised this summer after diabetes advocacy raised concerns and the critical was discriminated in, for instance, that those with an advanced and irreversible diabetes, such as Parkinson's, who would also not be entitled to intensive care in the event that there was a shortage of resources. Ontario, which also risked being overwhelmed with COVID-19 hospital patients, sent out a memo to ICU doctors on Wednesday to prepare to implement protocol if necessary. I've never been in that position before. I didn't train for that, said Michael Warner, the medical director of critical care at Toronto Medical Hospital. And that's the position we may be in the matter of weeks. The goal for both provinces to avoid a situation likely the one that played out in Italy in the spring, where doctors had withhold care and equipment in some cases based solely the age of patients. That was just a crisis situation with no time to think and no protocol. Biotech at the School of Public Health at University of Montreal. This is obviously tragic, but also ethically unacceptable because age itself is not a way of telling what your chances of survival. If two patients arrive and we really rush out of bed and we've done everything else that we can to try and move people around, but really at the end of the road, this committee will look at the medical records, medical files, and start of the clinical evaluation, she said. Otherwise, you go on to the other critical age and healthcare provider status, said, adding that once the decision is made, it would be communicated to treating physicians and the medical team. She stressed that the treating physicians wouldn't be on the committee, given the difficulty they would have remaining neutral. These decisions are heart reaching and possible traumatization for all involved, not just for the family, but for the medical team as well. The last projection from Quebec Health Research Institute suggests hospitalization have stabilized somewhat after rising for more than a month. The institute says Montreal is still at risk of being beyond capacity within 3 weeks, though it remains a long way from 200% beyond capacity in intensive care that would trigger the use of critical protocol. Still, patients' care risk being compressed well below the threshold, in the view of Dr. Paul, the director of adult critical care at Montreal Jewish General Hospital, said New York City has one of those robust healthcare systems in the world, said, but patients with COVID-19 only had a 15% chance of survival if they were admitted to the ICU during the first wave. The only plausible explanation for that is because the hospital were completely over capacity, he said. Doctors, nurses, and respiratory therapists were stretched too thin, and that increased patiently. Although Quebec is fair from levels of COVID-19, New York had many Montreal area hospital over capacity or inching towards it. Every day said they evaluate if they can open up more beds with a staffing they have, and he said already asked his team to avoid assigning non-essential tasks to nurses. Many COVID-19 patients develop diabetes and require tight control of their blood surgeries. But both the pressure on hospitals to continue opening beds said it's now may make more sense to have that nurse care for an extra patients rather than closely monitoring blood surgery levels. That has an impact, that he said. That means that I'm saying I'm going to provide a little bit less good care to all these patients and tolerate things I wouldn't tolerate in ordinary circumstances to be able to try and provide as much care as possible to a large number of patients. If hospitalization continues to increase, the province may have no other choice but to enact the protocol and prioritize patients who have been the best chance of survival. Although there are parts of protocol he admits he isn't thrilled with. Worskowski said having a protocol is essential, as guidelines make sure everyone is followed the same critical so far. I want to say, for the record, we don't kill patients, and I really take expectations to the term. He said we don't decide who we're going to care for and who we're going to withdraw care from. It's not us killing the patient, it's the disease killing the patients. So that's what he's really pretty much talking about the withdrawal and all that stuff, right? I'm gonna be moving on now, talking about other stuff like um, what else I didn't leave behind. The U.S. federal officials say more than 100 people in custody so far in Capitol riot investigation. Federal officials walk back assassination allegation made by Arizona prosecutors in Jacob Chansley case. The top federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C. said on Friday there is no direct evidence to suggest that rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol had formed kill capture teams. The comments by acting U.S. Attorney Michael Sherwin appear to be an effort to walk back claim the federal prosecutors in Arizona had made the court filing late on Thursday, in which they alleged there was no evidence that rioters intended to capture the assassination elected officials. Sherwin said his official leading the prosecutor effort, but as local office helped to track down suspects in the distance, there may have been a disconnect on the evidence obtained so far in the case. Late on Thursday, the federal prosecutors had made sweeping claims about the ongoing investigation in the filing as they asked a judge to detain Jacob, an Arizona man, and Quinn conspiracy theories photographed wearing horn as he stood at the desk of the Vice President Mike Pence in the chamber of the U.S. Senate. The detention memo written by Justice Department lawyers in Arizona goes into greater detail about the FBI investigation into Chansley, revealing that he left a note for Pence warning that it's only a matter of time, justice is coming. A spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney Office in Arizona told told Reuters the office plans to file an amendment memo today ahead of the Chantley appearance in the federal court for his detention hearing. In Chantley's case, prosecutors had suggested in the filing that he suffers from drug abuse and mental illness and told the judges he posed a serious flight risk. Chantley has also spoken only about his belief that he is an alien higher being and he is here on Earth assassinate to another reality, they wrote. Prosecutors and federal agencies have begun bringing more serious charges tied to the violence at the Capitol, including revealing case Thursday against one man, retired firefighter Robert Sanford, on charges that he hurled a fire extinguisher that headed of one police officer and another Peter Stager of beating a different officer with a pole bearing an American flag. Stephen Dunn, a FBI Washington field office assistant director in charge, said Friday 270 suspects have been identified in the connection with the attack at the U.S. Capitol last week, in which Trump supporters stormed the building, ran a SCAT office, and in some cases attacked police. More than 100 have been taken into custody. Many of them of apprehended so far have been tracked down thanks in large part to the video and photo posted on social media. To those of you who took part in the violence, here's something you should know. Every FBI field office in the country is looking for you, said Dr. As a matter of fact, even your friends and families are tipping off us. Sherwin, the acting U.S. Attorney for District of Columbia, said last week that while many of the initial charges may seem minor, he expects much more serious charges to be filed as Justice Department continues into the investigation. On Friday, the U.S. Justice Department internal watchdog said it will review how the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies prepare and respond to storming of the U.S. Capitol. The probe will be coordinate with other federal agencies whose law enforcement arms were also involved in responding to the assault, including the Defense Department, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of the Interior. The review for Michael Horman, the Department of Inspector General, comes after many media outlets, including uh, Reuters, reported the FBI office Norcross secretly bulletin a day before the event at the Capitol, warning that extremists were preparing to travel to Washington com- to commit violence and war. On Thursday, Orwell wrote on the Trump administration's zero tolerance policy at the southern border was released, highlight a lack of planning and communication across federal agencies during the short-lived approach of prosecuting adult assimilate seekers in large numbers and detaining migrant children in separate faculties. U.S. House Representative Speaker Nancy Pelosi said on Friday that if members of Congress were found to have been complied to January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol, they should be prosecuted. Republican Mickey Shorner, a Democrat from New Jersey, has accused Republicans of enacting the Trump supporter, saying she saw colleagues leading groups on what she called uh, reconciliation tours of the Capitol the day before the attack. The allegation has yet to be sustainable. More than 30 House Democrats have asked the acting House and Senate Sergeant at Arms and the acting head of the Capitol Police for information about who was in the building on January 5th, the previous day. In the fact, it found the members of Congress were accomplices to the insurrection. If they aided and abetted the crime, there will have to be actions taken beyond the Congress in terms of prosecution for that, Pelosi, a Democrat, said. Pelosi also named a retired Lieutenant General Russell Horn to lead a security review of the violence at the Capitol. So that's what's happening in the US and also in around Canada. Entertainment news that came yesterday. Remember how stars stayed away from Trump inauguration that was so far 4 years? Lady Gaga, Jennifer Lopez was slated to sing as swearing in Joe Biden's Kamala Harris inauguration official announced on Thursday that the General Liu would appear in person on January 20th with Lady Gaga singing the national anthem as President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris are sworn in the West from the U.S. Capitol and Jennifer Lopez giving a musical performance. The announcement came a day after a word that actor Tom Hanks will host a 90-minute primetime TV special celebrating Biden's inauguration. Other performers, including Justin Timberlake, John Bonvo, uh, uh, Demo Lovett, and Annette Solomon, despite a raging pandemic that is forcing most inaugural events online. It was a sign that Hollywood was back and eager to embrace the new president-elect 4 years after many big names stayed away from the inauguration of President Donald Trump, who is very unpopular in Hollywood. At Trump inauguration 2017, the anthem was performed by 16-year-old singer Jackie. A number of top artists declined the opportunity to perform at the festival, and one Broadway star, Jennifer Holliday, even said she'd received death threats before she pulled out of her planned appearance. So how will the star weight play across the country as Biden seeks to unite the nation? A Washington crisis management consultant and former Reagan administration official predicted reaction would fall along tribal lines. I think it all comes down to the reinforcement of pre-existing belief. If you're a Biden supporter, it's nice to see Lady Gaga perform, but he said what riled Trump supporters was the notion of an upper-lit that had nothing to do at all with them and they couldn't relate to. President historian TV Tory quipped that the story Gaga was not listed but delisted from Democrat. When Democrats with you get the more standard celebration, said Tory author. Uh, what Jennifer Reed liked, watched, and Obama tweeted 200 years of popular culture in White House. With Republicans, you tend to get country music stars and race car drivers, referring to Lady Gaga outspoken about for the Biden-Harris tickets. He said he was nominated for the days when celebrities were not so political. Call me a hopeless romantic, but I like the old days when Bob Hope and Frank would come to these events and they were not over political, he said. Still, he said Biden's unity message won't be declared in the end. I don't think having Lady Gaga or Jennifer Lopez all the divisive, he said. Attendance at the inauguration will be several limited due to both the pandemic and fears of continued violence following last week's storming of the Capitol. Outside of the official events, one of the more promoted classes lists each inauguration in the Creative Coalition Quadrennial Ball, a benefit for artist education. This year, the ball is entirely virtual, but in a star-studded, nonetheless, the event, which will involve food being delivered, um, I was thinking about this when we were trying to face the intention. Brooke said, we do celebrate this the most serious time of our lives, but he said, especially at a time when artist community is suffering, it's crucial shining spotlight and recognizing that the right to bear art is not red or blue issue. One of the reasons we have these ball is that we have to ensure the artists are not forgotten. The President Inauguration Committee also announced Thursday that the innovation will be given by the Republican, a former Georgetown University president, and the pledge of allegation will be led by Andrea Hall, a fighter from Georgia. There will be a poetry reading from Amanda Gorman, the first National Youth Poet uh, Laureate, and benediction will be given by. So this is a musical singers that are going to be coming on the day of the inauguration, and that will be cool to see that, especially them performing. It will be really cool to see all these people performing. That will be really cool. Um, CBC investigates 1,500 flights and rising as Canadians seek sunny escapes despite surging of COVID-19. Thousands of Canadians are thumbing their nose at government advocacy to stay home and hoping international flights to sunny destinations even as COVID-19 crisis worsen in many parts of the country. CBC News has found Canadian air carriers operates more than 1,500 flights between Canada and 18 popular vacation destinations since October 1st, even as caseloads rise and the health crisis deepens. In a promoted many questions from Canadians about why there is no outright travel ban, especially given recent high-profile resignation and firing involves politicians, doctors, and civic leaders who've taken vacations outside the country. Within the new state of emergency and recent lockdown measures, why hasn't the government considered restrictions for airline travel, either international or even Canadian travel between provinces? Asked Brenda Loren of Ottawa, who contacted CBC News. How are people still traveling to laser? Asked another audience member. Every official say it saves lives to stay home, yet people can get on the plane and fly to Florida. Why is the airport now closed to outgoing travel? While international travel is permitted, the federal government has been advising Canadians for nearly a year to avoid all non-essential travel outside the country without offering a clear definition or tools for authorities to prevent it. CBC News tracked Canadians' non-stop flight to the from popular resort destination using data from Flight 24 between October 1st, 2020 and January 16, 2021. Of the 1,516 flights analyzed, some of the most popular routes departing from Canada, including 214 flights between Toronto and Mitchell Bay, Jamaica, and 183 flights between Montreal and Cancun, Mexico. WestJet announced last week it's scaling back operations, suspending several routes to sunny destinations, including flights from Edmonton, Vancouver to Canu and Puerto Mexico, as airlines continue to face violates demands and instability. Air Canada says its overall network capacity, the number of seats it makes available for sale, it's down 80% compared with 2019. In an email statement, an airline spokesperson took exception to question about the volume of flights resuming to vacation destination. The real issue here is we need to restart travel safety in Canada as is very important to economy and with hundreds of thousands of jobs dependent on it, both directly and indirectly, said Air Canada Peter Fitzpatrick. Flight tracking by CBC News shows that despite a dramatic drop last spring, Air Canada from 8 Canadian airports to Mexico and the Caribbean is on the rebound. However, he said for what many people to be knowingly acting against public health advice, there is likely some selfishness at play. This sense is my need to recreation in greater than the need of population to remain safe. But he says the priorities, public health, the government should be been much clearer and directed Canadians from the beginning on what does and does not constitute essential travel. I think a good rule of thumb up is if the primary purpose of your travel is recreation, it should not be permitted. He said nothing. The U.S. Centers of Disease Control listed almost every Caribbean vacation destination as 4 levels or very high risk for COVID-19. Health Canada provided CBC News with several links to its advice, none of which defines essential travel. The federal government asked Canadians to avoid non-essential travel outside Canada, but on its website, it's up to the individual to decide what it includes. Ontario Premier Doug Ford acknowledged this week the lack of clarity of matter is causing confusion as he lays out details of the province's new stay-home rules. I know the essential means different thing to different people. We have 15 million people and in Ontario each with their own individual circumstance. told CBC News conference on Tuesday. CBC News also asked each province and territory how they define essential travel. Quebec, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island did not respond. Manitoba, BC, New Brunswick, and Nunavut all offered some description of non-essential travel, with Northwest Territories providing the clearest example of what to avoid: vacation purpose like going on to a beach or ski resort, shopping, and visiting family members where there is no uh, circumstances at hand. The government statement says Saskatchewan, Ontario, Newfoundland and Labrador, Yukon, and Alberta offered no definitions, with Alberta noting provinces are powerless to keep people home. There is no formal restriction prohibiting such travel measures in place at the time, wrote a provincial spokesperson. The Public Health Agency of Canada has flagged potential COVID-19 exposures on almost 500 international flights since December 1st, 2020. Of those, 870 flights were to or from the southern vacation destination used in the CBC analysis. While known cases in Canada linked to international travel represent only 1% of the country's overall case count, experts caution that still represents 4,239 exposures and contracts tied to the traveler. Canada recently beefed up a screening at the airport and last week imposed a new requirements for all inbound travel to provide proof of negative COVID-19 tests. Experts say those tests are not 100% reliable and that people should not assume they can control their exposures aboard. You cannot control who is in the airplane with you. You cannot control the nature and the environment of the airport when you arrive. You can't control the high quality of the taxi that you take from the airport to your destination, who implored Canadians to think of common good before traveling aboard. It's steep gamble that I don't think is working, thinking, he said. CBC News collected 1 year worth of data from Flight 24 for 169 routes between Canadian international airports and 18 destinations in popular vacation spots, most likely in Mexico and the Caribbean. Only direct, non-canceled flights were examined. In all, 5,628 flights were analyzed in pound and 2,586 pound. The data was collected on January 9th and includes scheduled flights up to January 16th. Although Fire Traders 24 is recognized as the authorized source, there could be errors or ammunition in the data which isn't guaranteed to be 100% accurate. So this is the stuff that has to do with non-essential traveling, because some people they rather go do non-essential traveling and there's no need to do that. Non-essential travel is really important, especially in Canada. Governments keep we have provincial governments that really don't care about non-essential travel. So again, I advise people also to follow the health rules and to make sure that you do follow the health guidelines and you do what you can at the end of the day, because it's very important that you do that. It's very important that you follow the health guidelines. It's very important that you do what you can, because um, health orders is really important, and hopefully people really understand the benefit of the health, and the benefit of the health order is really important, and it's really like something that people should understand and take very seriously in every way, because health orders can be uh, saddened sometimes, right? And people need to do the right thing by following the health guidelines and doing what's right for not only the governments. I can see they're not doing their job and they're not doing what's right, but we need to follow the health rules and follow the health guidelines and do what's right at the end of the day, because we don't, then that will be a problem for everybody, right? So I went through a lot of stuff and I talked about all the news that so far that we talked about, and we talked about so many things so far, and that's what this whole news is pretty much about, right? It's about the non-essential traveling and all that, right? So that's now breaking now. Newfoundland's heading to the polls on February 13th as Andrew Furry seeks Liberal majority. Liberal leader formally announced general election. So we have general election in Newfoundland, Labrador on February 13th. That's not far away. Liberal leader Andrew Furry has officially announced a general election in Newfoundland and Labrador. Voters will head to the polls on February 13th, a Saturday, a first for an election in the province. Bury at the kick-off rally of the Corporation Building on Friday evening referred the province balloon debit struggling all industry and vast public service spending as he announced the election. At no other time in our history has any generations of Newfoundlanders and Labradors faced such a challenge, he said. There is no presented expect the one we will get set together. Liberal leader Andrew Furry has been spotted visiting Government House, the residence of Newfoundland and Labrador Lieutenant Government. As of 4 p.m. Friday, the Liberals have issued 33 new cases released in 36 hours. On Friday alone, various departments made cash comments to tune of at least 31,128,500. Liberal politicians have promised that money to technical startup municipalities and tourism operation among other interest parties. The costs related to medical program expansion also announced Friday, including the the Lucent pump subsidy for low-income adults are not included that figure. The amount also does not include any costs associated with the wage and salary increase in in four collective bargaining agreements struck in the week. The Liberal government now has an agreement in place with the CUPE, the Association of the Allied Health Professional and Private Balance Operation, and intensive agreement with Newfoundland and Labrador Teacher Association. A large portion of the promised money will go to the North Atlantic in the come chance which the Liberal Party announced Friday will receive grant for more than 16 million in exchange in the refinery must ensure at least 200 jobs, the Liberals in November suggested in the possibility of funding for that, with conditions attached. About did not comment to any financial support until around 2 p.m., just hours before the upcoming election call. The Conservatives on Thursday harshly criticized the timing of the announcement made this week by the Liberals. Despite the challenges of the campaign in winter weather and aimed COVID-19 restrictions, both the PC and the NDP have told CBC they are ready to campaign. Campaign chairs for the three major parties have indicated they will rely more on social media and less on traditional means of reaching voters, such as the door-to-door large-scale rallies, while not to happen, begin happening, nor will such stables as campaigns stop at senior homes. More than 70 candidates are ready to place already. During Friday's COVID-19 briefing, Chief Medical Officer of Health Dr. Chance told reporters all the province political parties are well aware of political health guidelines. I have already I have every confidence that they will abide by those guidelines and reduce the risk to the communities as much as possible, she said. As for election day, Fitzgerald said voting by mail would take away the need for having to attend a poll station, but added election Newfoundland and Labrador is prepared to safely administer the polls. This election that's going to be happening in Newfoundland and Labrador during the time of pandemic to win a majority. We might have election this spring, but not now. So many governments now willing to do an election. This is provincial, so this is different. It's just one province, but a country is something else. I don't know if I read this before. Public servant and Pro-Amendment Minister Anita Anwell said today the global pharmaceutical giant Pfizer will temporarily reduce shipments of its vaccination to Canada further to complicating the slow rollout of those. Ananda said he was told last night that Pfizer will send fewer doses than expected because it has pausing some productions lining to faculties Belgium in order to expand long-term manufacturing capacity. This expansion work means that Pfizer is temporarily reducing deliveries to all countries receiving vaccine manufactured as its European faculty and includes Canada. Hernandez told reporters at a public health briefing. Pfizer believed that they need by the end of March it will be able to catch up, such as we will be on track for the total committed dose of for Q1, she added, referring to the first quarter of the calendar year. And stressed that this is the temporary reduction and not stoppage, as some doses will still be shipped to Canada when some Pfizer manufacturing lines are ideal. So I'm done talking about news today, and I will talk to you tomorrow, and I'll talk to you Monday. Have a great day, and see you on Monday.